Hi everyone. In this video I'd like to give you a brief overview of the basics of the way the internet works in the World Wide Web. So we start with the web page development activities. So it is important to understand that web page development is not just creating a simple text page and posting it online. There's a lot more going on. You need to be considered a graphic design. You need to keep in mind that the look and feel of your website is important. So how is the web page going to be displayed by the browser? Information design refers to the content of the web page and its structure or organization. So what are you presenting and how are you presenting it? The user interface design refers to how easy it is for people to use the information that you present. Additional considerations include what combination of technologies you'll be using: style sheets, graphics, JavaScript, extensible HTML, and so on. Your pages do not have to be interactive. In fact, back in the 1990s, when I was starting with web development, all of our web pages were static. We were concerned with graphics and text, but never with interactivity. Today, this is a very important part of website design. So, do you want to work with a database? Do you want to create any graphics dynamically, etc.? So this is where JavaScript and other interactive technologies come in to help you, both on the client side and the server side. And then finally, multimedia considerations. So you want to have audio and video, and exactly how are you going to present that? So all of these combines and represents web page development. The World Wide Web Service, which is what we're concerned with in this class, is the most widely and used service on the internet. It's not the only one. It's important to understand there's quite a few additional ones. We have FTP for transferring just basic files over the net. We have email. We have distribution and sharing of IP addresses, domain names, and so on and so forth. But the www is the most popular and most widely used one on the internet. We want to make our web design, we want to be cautious when we design our web pages. Otherwise, we run the risk of ending up with pages that have various problems that are not user friendly. So, for example, a page could be too large and take too long to download from the server. The text may not be easily readable. You may be having confusing backgrounds that will make it difficult for people to read what's on the screen. Or you may have a website that's difficult to navigate. You've got a whole maze of pages. So these are all things to always consider when you're designing your websites. It really just understand that it's not just simply combining text and colors and images in some random manner. So you have to be careful about the design. Challenges for the web page developer. It is important to understand that when you're creating web pages, those pages are different than the ones you have in books and magazines. You really don't have total control over the end result. So you have an excellent idea of what your website is going to look like, but from browser to browser and from system to system, your web page may end up getting displayed in slightly different manners. So different computers could have different window sizes, different screens, different resolutions, which relates to the clarity. Of course, mobile devices have smaller screens, and you need to be considerate of that. In fact, some computers, some systems may end up displaying the same color in a slightly different way, so that is a possibility as well. Okay, accessibility considerations are also very important and could even be legal issues. You need to take into account what users may be accessing your website and the fact that some people have visual or physical disabilities. And things like, for example, would you want to allow the very young users to access your websites, or you may have elderly people accessing and trying to read your web pages? So these are all things that are important to consider when you're designing your websites. In fact, web browsers are going to help you quite a bit. They're going to try and do their best to properly display your web pages so that it's easy for people to read them. For example, when you resize a window, the browser may try to fill whatever space is available as best it can, but still it's important to take this into consideration. The web page designer must consider the following list of issues: aesthetics, how pleasing the appearance of your website is; navigational help, you don't want your users to get lost in hyperspace; as I mentioned earlier, accessibility, is the content clear, is it readable; usability, is it easy for the user to move around the website or not; and interactivity, does the user need to interact with the web page? Like I said a moment ago, we need to remember that we don't really know what browsers users are going to be using to visit our website. We don't know what their screen resolution is going to be. We don't know their bandwidth, their connection speed that they're using to connect to the internet, and we don't know what physical disabilities they might have. So we need to design our websites accordingly. The basics of the web service. The web service, quite like all the other services on the internet, is based on a client-server architecture, where you're going to have clients making requests from servers and servers responding accordingly. Okay, so your browser essentially is the client in this case with this particular service. And then the web server on the other end is a program running on a computer that responds to your requests. So for the internet, computers that are used to access a server are generally referred to as client computers, and then the computers that provide the service are referred to as the servers. Okay. Alright, and this is a visual representation of how this takes place. You got a list of clients making requests, and you got a server on the other end somewhere responding in some meaningful manner. And by meaningful manner, I mean you could be requesting an item that doesn't exist or that you're not allowed to use, so the server will make that determination, and it will either send the item you're requesting back to you, or it will give you some kind of error message telling you what happened and why you're not going to get that item that you requested. Okay. What kind of software do we use to enable this? So how does this exactly take place? Well, the software we're using for the World Wide Web Service is called the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, HTTP. It's the method that we use to transfer information over the web. It's very similar to, say, the File Transfer Protocol, but it's got an extra step in there, in that you not only exchange files with the help of this protocol, but you also take the trouble to identify them. So, for example, if you're sharing an audio file, you're not only going to send back the audio file to the client, but you are going to tell the client that you are sending an audio file so that it would know what to do with it. That's the difference between FTP and HTTP. FTP doesn't care to identify the files that you're exchanging. Okay, this is a protocol. It's important to note that it's not a programming language. It's really just a set of rules and procedures that govern the behavior of the browsers and the servers. Okay. And you can see another visual representation here of how the whole process takes place. You make a request for a web page, you get back the web page from the server. If there are any additional resources that are needed, like for example images that need to be displayed, you request those and the server sends them back to you as well. Uh, Modern browsers are designed to be capable of displaying text and graphics and multimedia, including sounds and videos, through, well, either plugins or just functionality that's built into the servers. It's important to remember that not all browsers are equal, so to speak. For example, Microsoft Internet Explorer and Firefox could have their own proprietary elements and technology built into their browsers. So a web page designed to display perfectly on one of these may not do so on another. Okay, so if you are designing a website that is important to you to look perfect on all the browsers, you need to make sure you test it with all the browsers. And I do need to update this list here. I got Internet Explorer, but Microsoft recently has been pushing the Edge browser really hard, so that they're trying to deprecate and basically leave Explorer in history and just replace that with the Edge browser. So I need to update this. Okay. Web servers. Now, chances are, if you are learning about setting up, installing and setting up and using a web server on the server side, you'll probably be doing so for either Apache, if you're on a Unix system, or Microsoft's IIS, which is the Internet Information Server, if you're on a Windows server, on a Windows system. These are not the only two browsers out there. In fact, there's quite a few of them available, and I did a few moments ago check out to see what the most popular servers are today, or this year I should say, and here's the result. From what I saw, Apache is still the most popular browser. I was quite surprised to see this one here in second place, Nginx. I don't really know much about it. I looked it up online. It's a Russian company that developed it. A Russian guy created this about 15 years ago. The main idea with it is it's designed to be very fast and handle multiple requests and work within a Unix system. Today they have a version for Windows as well, but originally it was designed for the different Unix systems, and it was written in C. Apparently, currently it's very popular, or a lot of websites are using it, I should say. I try to look up what websites are using this server. Globally, one of the big ones was Hulu. In Bulgaria, one of the big ones using this was VBox 7. So can't really tell you more about this. I'm not really acquainted with it, but it turns out currently it's a popular server. Okay, but still, like I said, if you are learning how to set up a server, Apache and IIS are the two really important ones to know about. On the client side, what people have been requesting, again, I looked up this information a few moments ago to see currently what is really popular. People, this is the results for global searches. People globally have been accessing these servers. This is a list of the most popular servers today. And it's really interesting if you take a moment to check out what the most popular websites are in Bulgaria or Albania or whatever country you're from. Probably Google and YouTube will still be up at the top, but the rest of this list is going to change, and there's some really interesting websites that you probably don't even know anything about that are going to show up in those lists. So I encourage you to take a moment and check out this list of popular websites in your country. As far as history of the World Wide Web goes, I'll let you peruse that on your own. I've got a couple of links here for you on the web that give you interesting information in a relatively succinct manner for the history of the World Wide Web. One is on the W3 website and the other one is on Wikipedia. And as I was performing these searches for the history of the web, I noticed that I was getting quite a few results reminding me that I can look up my own history by going to My Activity Google. Turns out I have actually disabled this for my account some time ago. But if you haven't, you'll be able to see you're going to find this really interesting to see what kinds of videos you've been watching on YouTube, where exactly you've been going if you've been using Google Maps, and what kinds of Google searches you've been performing over the years. I'll probably turn this back on again. I'm not really concerned about privacy here. This is really going to be the way I figure is they use this for targeted advertising. So we're still going to be seeing ads whether we want that or not, but this is going to help make the ads more pertinent to whatever is you're interested in at the moment. For example, some time ago I was teaching game design and development. That lasted for about 5 years, and you can imagine that my searches on the web have been linked to that. And so the ads that I was probably seeing at that time were linked to things like consoles or games and anything that has to do with whatever I was concerned with online at that time. All right, features of the World Wide Web. We should note that it's based on hypertext. It's an information system based on hypertext. It's available on different types of computers and devices, so it's cross-platform. It's a worldwide web. It's a worldwide service, so it's distributed around the entire world, and it's based on open standards and open source technologies such as TCP/IP, HTTP, HTML, CSS. Now in class I'm going to go over some of those or most of those acronyms because terminology is important, and I'll explain each and every one of them. The web browser provides a single interface for many user information services, things like banking, commerce, news, etc. And it's dynamic, interactive, and evolving. It means it includes things like collective intelligence, data mashups, rich user experience. The nature of the web is represented here on this slide. It's a variety of devices that we're using. It's a variety of internet speeds that we're using, number of displays, number of browsers, different browser settings, different kinds of users, and different languages. So this is how we can visualize the web. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're creating a commercial website that is really important for you to display properly on all devices, probably the best way to approach the situation is have two versions of it. One version will be for mobile devices with the smaller screens and a layout on your web pages that takes that into consideration, and another version for the desktop computers with the larger screens and larger browser windows. The web organization based on browsers and servers. So the browsers that read the HTML web pages comprise three main components. We have the structure component, which corresponds to the organization of web page content. Got the presentation component, which is how we want the browser to display or format the web pages on the computer screen. And we have the behavior component, so how the user interacts with the web page, how dynamic it is, and what kinds of animated effects it has, for example. Structure, presentation, and behavior. Structure is achieved through the HTML markup, and it's responsible for the content. The presentation is achieved through cascading style sheet rules. It's responsible for the way the website looks. And finally, behavior is achieved through the dynamic component, which is not really JavaScript only, but I did put that in there because it's probably the most common way of people creating dynamic components to web pages on the client side. And so this is responsible for what happens when the user tries to interact with the web page, like for example when they use the mouse and click on a button, or when they make selections to inside a web form, for example. As far as the servers are concerned, they comprise two main components. We got that part of the service which handles the web pages. So you get requested web pages from the server storage and then you send them back to the browser. And we also have the dynamic content generation, which is languages, interpreted languages that run on the server side, or compiled languages. So for any given web page, the content delivered by the server may be dynamically created just before the web page is sent back to the browser. That requires server-side programming. The industry standards, they're set forth by the World Wide Web Consortium. That's where the website is, w3c.org. And if you go to the standards webpage on that site, it's a really nicely organized website. I did check it out a few moments ago. It basically allows you to read up, to read on all the standards that they work on, and to even become a member of the organization if you'd like to, if you need to. Okay, so this organization is in charge of setting forth the standards for the internet and the World Wide Web. We should note that they do set forth standards, but not all browsers always implement them properly, and that quite often browsers may introduce their own tags and their own standards in trying to influence the standards for the entire internet and the World Wide Web. So they don't always recognize, for example, Firefox and Microsoft don't recognize each other's HTML extensions, the ones that they have created. Okay, web pages that use non-standard, even newer elements may not display well for all users. So this is mostly a recommendation then. The standards are evolving. I should point out that as well. So HTML was originally invented, I believe, in the early 1980s. I think in 1980s when somebody came up with the idea for an HTML language and an HTTP protocol that allows you to exchange documents over a network. And then from that point on, it has never stopped evolving. Currently, we're in HTML version 5.2, I think. This is the last thing I was looking at earlier. Yep. So on Wikipedia, if you go check out the history of HTML, this is the gentleman that invented it back in 1980, with some information on when and how this was invented and why. And you can see here that HTML5 was first introduced in 2014, and currently we're in HTML 5.2. And this keeps evolving, so it's a good thing to remember. Finally, on my last slide here, this image is a little bit out of date, but I like it because it summarizes exactly how HTML evolved, which is why I left it in my presentation. So in the 2000s, people were using HTML4. There were some issues with it. XHTML was invented, the extensible hypertext markup language, to fix those issues. It's a very strict language with some very strict rules that I'll talk about in my other video. But we have evolved from that, and currently we're in HTML5, which really takes the best out of HTML4 and XHTML, and it gets rid of all the problems and errors that were in those too. So again, this evolution hasn't stopped. This is still evolving, but we're currently using HTML5, and that's what we're going to be using in our class as well. That wraps up our discussion on the overview of the World Wide Web service and the internet. Thank you very much for watching.